Hello everybody! Every good franchise needs a core trio. For instance, Harry Potter has the Golden Trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And Star Wars is no different. The original trilogy has Luke, Han, and Leia. The prequels have Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. Or if we're talking about Clone Wars, it would be Anakin, Ahsoka, and either Obi-Wan or Rex. And the sequel trilogy has Rey, Finn, and Poe. However, if Harry, Ron, and Hermione are the Golden Trio, I think that Rey, Finn, and Poe are the failed trio. Of the many things that went wrong with the sequel trilogy, I think that the attempt of a trio of Rey, Finn, and Poe is one of the worst. As a character trio, they just didn't work. However, if it wasn't for the Rise of Skywalker, there really wouldn't even be a reason to think that they were a trio. I mean, sure, the marketing of the movies certainly set them up to be a trio, because the higher-up executives just needed to have a Luke, Han, and Leia for this trilogy. But when you watch The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, there's really no reason to call them a trio. But then this happened, which pretty much confirms that they are indeed a trio. Now you might say, oh, well, they spent the whole movie together, so it makes sense that they're hugging. Plus, I mean, they just saved the whole galaxy and made it out alive. I mean, everybody's happy. Everybody's hugging. I mean, of course they're gonna hug. And while, yes, that is all true and a valid argument looking from the characters' perspectives, you have to look at it from the perspective of the audience. To the audience, this is the end of a story trio hug. From the score, to the camera angles, to the amount of time that the camera is kept on the hug. This is a Harry, Ron, and Hermione at the end of Deathly Hallows hug. This is a Luke, Han, and Leia at the end of Return of the Jedi hug. This is a we just spent multiple movies with these characters and the story has finally ended hug. But the problem is, it doesn't work here. Because when you look at the rest of the trilogy, you don't feel like that they are the core trio. They're more like the three characters who just happen to be the ones we've been following for 3 movies. And to show why this trio didn't work, I'm going to look at the original trilogy and this trilogy side by side and compare the evolution of the Luke, Han, and Leia trio to the Rey, Finn, and Poe trio. And the way I'm going to track progression is I'm going to give each movie a check mark when it develops the relationship between 2 characters. So if the Return of the Jedi develops the relationship between Han and Luke, it gets a check mark. Don't worry, it'll make more sense as we go. First, A New Hope and The Force Awakens. So right out of the bat, in both movies, we meet one character in the trio pretty much immediately. Leia in A New Hope, and Poe in The Force Awakens. We see that both are working for that trilogy's resistance. But then, they both get captured. Leia by Darth Vader in the Empire, and Poe by Kylo Ren in the First Order. Now here's when the sequel trilogy actually gets a bit of a leg up on the original trilogy, because it actually has 2 characters in the trio meet much earlier than the original trilogy does. Poe Dameron and Finn, or still at the time FN2187, quickly form a friendship. Well, actually friendship seems like a bit of an understatement there. But then Poe Dameron dies. Not really, but that's what we're supposed to think. However, this is one of those instances where the trailer spoils the movie. Because if you had watched the trailer, you would know that Poe was there in later scenes, so he can't be dead. However, for all intensive purposes, comment below if you understood that reference, Poe is dead. But since The Force Awakens started to develop the relationship between Finn and Poe, it gets a checkmark.
Good to meet you, Poe. Good to meet you too, Finn.
Looking back at A New Hope, Luke and Han meet in Mos Eisley and fly the Millennium Falcon to the Death Star to save Princess Leia. So at this point, both trilogies have begun to develop the relationships between 2 characters in the trios, meaning that both each have 1 checkmark.
Han Solo. I'm captain of the Millennium Falcon.
So, staying with the original trilogy, Luke and Han save Leia, and the 3 of them escape the Death Star. And throughout the escape, all 3 relationships get some development. Han and Leia bicker the whole time. Luke and Leia at one point run around the Death Star alone. And after they escape, Luke and Han have a conversation that gives them more development.
What do you think? Do you think a princess and a guy like me?
No.
Which also coincidentally goes back to Leia developing both of their relationships with her. Therefore, A New Hope has successfully developed all 3 relationships in the trio, meaning it has all 3 checkmarks, finishing the round.
So one day still alive.
Back at the sequels, I think that The Force Awakens did a lot of development for Finn and Rey, so it gets a checkmark for that. However, Rey and Poe still haven't met yet, therefore they don't get a checkmark. So, at the end of this round, A New Hope has all 3 checkmarks, while The Force Awakens only has 2. Now, on to Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. So, the big similarity between these 2 movies is that one character goes off on their own journey away from the other 2. Therefore, there's a lot more development between one pair of characters in the trio than there is for the other two. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke goes to Dagobah, leaving Han and Leia's relationship to develop. And in The Last Jedi, Rey goes to Ahch-To, or as I like to call it, Ahch-To. So when Rey goes back to Ahch-To, bless you, leaving Finn and Poe's relationship to develop. So obviously, in The Empire Strikes Back, Han and Leia get a check mark. Throughout the movie, their relationship, especially their romantic one, gets developed a lot.
I love you.
I know.
Luke and Han get a bit of development at the beginning, when Han saves Luke by cutting open a tauntaun and putting him inside of it. So, I'm gonna say that's enough to give them a check mark.
I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
And Luke and Leia also get a check mark, because they also get a bit of development at the beginning and end. Yeah, let's just give them a check mark and move on from that. Also, Luke talks about Han and Leia, and they talk about him throughout the movie, so that also covers their relationships too. So The Empire Strikes Back gets all 3 check marks. However, on the sequel side of things, Poe and Finn really didn't get that much development as they should have had. This is mostly because Finn is off with Rose for most of the movie. But Poe and Finn, like Luke and Leia, get a bit of development at the beginning and end, so I'm gonna give them a check mark.
It's a need-to-know plan, and she doesn't.
Then Finn and Rey, I'm only gonna give them a check mark because of this.
You must have 1,000 questions.
Where's Ray?
But to be honest, it's really a pity check mark because that's pretty much the extent of the development in this movie.
Where's Ray?
And Rey and Poe, again, don't get a check mark. However, they do finally meet at the end of this movie, so that's better than nothing, I guess. And now, finally, the Return of the Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker. So in both of these, the group is together for most of the movie. In Return of the Jedi, Han and Luke get a check mark because Luke saves Han from Jabba the Hutt. Han and Leia get a check mark because their romantic relationship gets developed more in this movie.
I love you.
I know.
And Luke and Leia obviously finds out that they're siblings. So again, they get a check mark, and let's please move on from that.
Leia's my sister.
However, in The Rise of Skywalker, there's really no development for anybody. Finn and Poe are really the only two that get any slightest bit of development, so they get a check mark.
I'm sorry, is this a bad time? Sort of is a bad time.
Because I gave them a check mark for this in The Last Jedi,
Where's Ray?
I have to give them a check mark for this
Ray, I never told you Ray!
in The Rise of Skywalker. So, against my better judgment, Finn and Rey get a check mark.
Ray, I never told you Ray!
But again, it's a pity check mark. And Rey and Poe, I mean, at least they've met now, but there's really no development, so no check mark. So as you can see, at the end of the trilogies, all 3 of the originals have all 3 check marks, while the sequels never got above 2. And as you can also see, the missing link for the sequels is mainly between Poe and Rey. The relationship between these 2 characters is the main thing that keeps Rey, Finn, and Poe from being a trio. In my opinion, the sequel trilogy made 3 mistakes with these characters. The first mistake was not having Poe in the rescue mission in The Force Awakens. Poe should have been there with Finn, Han, and Chewie saving Rey on Starkiller Base. And yes, that would have been very similar to New Hope, but so is the rest of the actual movie, so I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If Poe was there on the rescue mission, you could have used that time to develop the relationship between him and Rey. And if you still wanted him flying above helping destroy Starkiller Base, you could have had him steal a TIE fighter or something. And that would actually mirror nicely to when he steals a TIE fighter at the beginning, so now he knows how to fly a TIE fighter. And the second mistake was waiting until the end of The Last Jedi to have Poe and Rey meet. They should have met long before that. Like I said, Poe should have been on the rescue mission and they should have met then. Having them meet at the end of the second movie forced them into a corner where they only had the third and final movie to give them any development. Which actually brings us nicely to the third mistake, which is not dedicating The Rise of Skywalker to developing their relationship. This movie was their last chance to give them any development, and they didn't do it. They didn't have any development in the previous 2 movies, so this one was the one where they needed to play catch-up. Rey and Poe isn't the only relationship that they made mistakes with, though. Finn and Poe should have been developed way more in The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi should have been their movie. Looking back at the original trilogy, each movie focused primarily on one relationship in the trio. A New Hope focused on Luke and Han, Empire Strikes Back on Han and Leia, and The Return of the Jedi on Luke and Leia. One of the major faults of the sequel trilogy is that it didn't dedicate each movie to one relationship. Sure, The Force Awakens very much focused on Finn and Rey, but The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker didn't focus on Finn and Poe or Poe and Rey. In fact, they seemed to focus on any and every relationship besides those. Instead, they focused on Rey and Kylo, Finn and Rose, Finn and Janna, Poe and Zori. And they somehow failed at most if not all of those too. And circling back to Finn and Rey, the relationship that they focused on the most in the trio, which isn't saying much, even that relationship wasn't really successful. I mean, after The Force Awakens, their relationship kind of fades to the background, being replaced by Rey and Kylo, and Finn and Rose, or Janna, or whoever it is at this point. I really don't care. And that is why Rey, Finn, and Poe failed as a trio. One relationship is hardly developed over the trilogy, another is basically abandoned after the first movie, and the last one really didn't even exist until the end of the second movie. And even after they meet, they might as well not have, because there's really no development after that. Rey, Finn, and Poe are the failed trio. Anyway, comment your thoughts below. Do you think that Rey, Finn, and Poe are the failed trio? Also, remember to like, subscribe, and check out some of my other videos. With that said, that's a wrap.